the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at #ethocide. Dictionary.com defines myth as follows: any invented story, idea, or concept. Any an imaginary or fictitious thing or person. An unproved or false collective belief that is used to justify a social institution. Some of the adjectives associated with the word myth are fake, fiction, fantasy, hoax, fairy tale, fallacy, urban legend, fabrication, hearsay, among others. Today, I would like to focus on another persistent falsehood that rears its ugly head in political speeches, newspaper columns, and even academic essays and books. I am, of course, referring to the so-called Andonian documents, fallaciously attributed to Talat Pasha. This 1983 book by Shinasi Orel and Süreyya Yüce, The Talat Pasha Telegrams, Historical Fact or Armenian Fiction, provides a scholarly evaluation of the so-called Talat Pasha telegrams and a sober assessment of the alleged Armenian genocide behind it. The authors examined all of the documents produced in the English and French editions of the Andonian book, which until the end of the 1970s served as the basis of many Armenians and their supporters' arguments. Orel and Yüce documented in their book that Naim Bey did not exist, and his memoir and the telegrams were forgeries. Okay, let's start at the beginning. The Memoirs of Naim Bey is the name of a book that supposedly exposes Turkish official documents relating to the Tereset, or temporary resettlement of the Ottoman Armenians of Eastern Anatolia into northern Syria and Iraq during a war of survival for the Ottoman Empire. It was a military necessity to clear the theater of action of all fifth column activities. This book allegedly contains some Talat Pasha telegrams used by some scholars deeply committed to the official Armenian narrative as evidence of the Ottoman intent to commit genocide. The smoking gun of sorts, the smoking that didn't really smoke and was not even a gun. The book was published by an Armenian journalist called Aram Andonian in 1919, in time for Paris Peace Conference. Originally redacted in Armenian, it was promoted worldwide through the English edition published by Hodder and Stockton of London. Some historians, uncritically subscribing to the official Armenian narrative, dismissed Orel and Yüce's meticulous research as a denial of the alleged Armenian genocide. As recently as 2017, one of them even claimed to have found one of those original telegrams archived in Jerusalem, which inquired about Armenian elimination. Now let's see if any of those telegrams ever existed. It's a moral obligation to inform all honest truth seekers that it is not possible to assess the Talat Pasha telegrams without first seeing the weighty evidence in this 344-page book. Aram Andonian, an unknown Armenian, who allegedly received some manuscripts, including the imaginary orders of Talat Pasha, from a minor Ottoman official called Naim Bey, working in the rehabilitation office in Aleppo, Syria. Orel and Süreyya examine such alleged document painstakingly in terms of both form and content, and suggest that they are definitely fake. Remember this so-called Zinoviev letter published by the British Daily Mail newspaper just 4 days before the general election of 1924? The letter was supposed to be a directive from Zinoviev, the head of the Communist International in Moscow, to the Communist Party in Great Britain, ordering it to engage in seditious activities. Well, that letter caused a conservative backlash and cost the 1924 election to the Labour Party, is now accepted as forgery. The bogus Talat Pasha telegrams is just another case of that infamous fake Zinoviev letter. Andonian's book in English is 84 pages, while its French version is 168 pages. The English version has 48 documents, but the French 50. These facts show that the contents of the two books by the same name are not really the same. The fact that the book by an unknown Armenian could be published so readily in several languages, mind you, in the post-war traumatic disorder of Europe, points to a very coordinated effort to vilify the Ottoman Empire. The book condemns the entire Turkish nation, a conduct sociologically flawed and academically unacceptable. In the book, Andonian states in a letter of 10 June 1921 that the documents were handed to him by the humanitarian Turk free of charge. In his letter of 26 July 1937, though, addressed to a certain Mary Terzian in Switzerland, the same Andonian declares that the Armenians paid for every document received from Naim Bey, who is now described as an alcoholic gambler and a greedy, corrupt person. These questions beg to be asked. If the latter description is correct, why did Andonian wait for 17 years to correct himself? And why silently in a private letter to an acquaintance, but not loudly in a public letter to a newspaper? Wouldn't professional decency require that a public correction be made? The answer may be that such a detailed description would arouse suspicion on the integrity of both the memoirs and the documents. It is clear that Andonian was not trying to protect Naim Bey, but maintain the credibility of his forged documents. Why the flip-flop? Andonian offers two different dates for when he got the documents from Naim Bey. In his book, it is after the British occupied Aleppo, and in the 1937 letter, before. So which one is it, before or after? Can such a gigantic mistake be dismissed as irrelevant? History tells us that when a foreign force invades a country, life in that country changes drastically in every conceivable aspect. So why the flip-flop? Couldn't he at least refer to his book and keep up the lie? Or did he want to correct a falsehood? It is also troubling that inconsistent motives are given to why Naim Bey happens to possess such documents that are way above his pay grade. In the book, Andonian suggests that documents were under Naim Bey's care, and that Naim Bey was looking for a way to disentangle himself from the responsibility. However, in the 1937 letter, he asserts that Naim Bey stole them to turn them into cash somehow. A 1981 French Dashnak publication asserts that after the British entry into Aleppo, an Armenian delegation requested the Turkish authorities to see the archives on the transfer of the Armenian population. It is not credible that the Turks were approached for permission, since such requests by martial law would have to be made by the occupying power, not the defeated one. The Dashnak publication probably wished to lend some more credibility to Andonian's book by adding the Turkish official bit after 61 years. Andonian writes that he met Naim Bey at the beginning of 1916, and that Naim Bey was dismissed from the office in the initial months of 1916. Keep that in mind. Aleppo fell to the British in October 1918, but Andonian had mentioned that the documents were in Naim Bey's possession. How can that be if Naim Bey was dismissed so long ago? Did Naim Bey steal them later? But that is impossible, because Andonian also maintains that the Ottoman government destroyed all the documents about the Armenian massacre. So let me get this right. A dismissed junior bureaucrat enters a government office 2.5 years after he is dismissed to steal highly secret documents that were destroyed in the first place. Does that make sense to you? If not, welcome to the Andonian's fairyland. Andonian writes that the documents are authentic without bothering to explain why the reader should accept them as such. He tries to address this blunder in a letter dated 10 June 1921, addressed to the Tehlirian's lawyers in 1921, of course. Tehlirian is the Armenian terrorist who assassinated Talat Pasha in Berlin in 1921. There, he gives guarantee of having seen the originals and that some documents had been countersigned by the governor of Aleppo, Mustafa Abdülhalik Bey. Okay, now watch. I must add that none of these documents bear any order, Talat Pasha, to massacre Armenians. Andonian tries to produce such involvement indirectly through the notes and signatures of the governor, Mustafa Abdülhalik, on the documents. The question of the authenticity of the signature remains unanswered. Andonian writes that the Armenian society established the signature's authenticity in Aleppo. Aleppo was occupied by the British and then transferred to the French, and that both were searching for the Ottoman officials that they deemed guilty. Why then did Andonian and the Armenian society in Aleppo not include the British and the French in this committee of experts and engage the resources of the occupying powers in this most important discovery? Why? On the question of the authenticity of the documents, the Armenian circles rely on the opinion of one Dr. W. Rössler, the German consul to Aleppo during the First World War. But even Rössler said that while the documents give the impression of being authentic, it was very difficult to say the same for the individual telegrams. Some authentication. Take Andonian's word for it. Andonian confesses in his letter of 26 July 1937 that Dr. Rössler found his book lacking objectivity. Andonian admits that his book is not a historical work, but a propaganda piece. That's what he says, propaganda piece. He added that the Armenian Bureau in London and Armenian National Council in Paris have freely used his manuscript as they wished. As the proverbial metaphor goes, they had a ball with it. But that party is over now, thanks to the forces of truth. What Andonian reveals in his 1937 letter obliterates his book's very foundations and the documents in it. It is a common misconception that the German kangaroo court, which tried Tehlirian, Talat Pasha's assassin, had accepted at least some Andonian Naim-based documents as authentic. The court proceedings minutes show that the court has neither accepted them as evidence nor judged them as accurate. Tehlirian's lawyer withdrew them. The prosecutor said that the use of false documents could not mislead him. He knew how often supposedly original documents were later proven to be fabrications. He knew. The fact is, the originals are nowhere to be found. Andonian says in his 1937 letter that they are probably lost. How convenient. One can safely proclaim that the documents are Andonian's fabrications, conveniently lost to escape scrutiny. Governor Mustafa Abdülhalik, whose signature is supposed to appear on several documents, was among those who were deported to the island of Malta by the British after the war. He was later acquitted by the Crown prosecutors. Now that's a fact. Abdülhat Nuri, another Ottoman official whose signature appears on the Andonian documents, was not even sent to Malta. It seems that the occupying British did not take Andonian's documents seriously. What happened to the originals of the documents, supposedly in Andonian's possession? What happened to them? Well, they're lost too, if you can believe it. I suspect Andonians destroyed them to escape forensic examination and embarrassment. Did Naim Bey, the hero of the documents, ever exist? The search of the Prime Minister's archives in Istanbul among the İrade-i Seniye, which means order, files, and the official gazette produced no records of a man's appointment by that name to the rehabilitation office in Aleppo. Some of the names that Andonian mentions in his book were found in the same archives. It is clear now that Naim Bey never existed. An entirely unimportant official. How can that entirely unimportant person have access to such top secret material? And what about the various factual errors, blunders, and flaws that expose Andonian's lies? He seems ignorant about the difference between the Rumi, which is Julian, and the Miladi, Gregorian calendars. One adds 584 years, to the years and 13 to the days. So Rumi, 3 September 31, becomes Miladi, September 1, 1915. But only 12 days were added until 1316. The Rumi's year starts on March 1. Since January and February, our last 2 months, can only be found adding 584 plus 1. For instance, 5 January 31 becomes 18 January 1919. Now, the Miladi year system was adopted in 1925 during the Republican era, after the book was published. Not knowing the Ottoman system's intricacies, Andonian made embarrassing errors in placing dates on those documents. His first document bears the date of 18 February 1331. But in the Miladi equivalent, is not 18 February 1915. The Rumi date needed on the forged document had to be 18 February 1330. The document with the 18 February or 2 March 1916, as the date fails to serve Andonian's purpose, since he quotes this document to prove premeditation or a government pre-plan of the transfer of Armenian population. Now, how can you have a 1916 document showing premeditation for an alleged crime to be committed in 1915? How absurd is that? The second document bears the date of 25 March 1331. But since the first document is dated 18 February 1331, it can only be 25 March 1332. Ottoman New Year takes effect on March 1, remember? The date of the first document is later corrected as 18 February 1330. Too late, as Andonian has already given himself away. This realization of many errors is why Andonian left out the original of the first document from the English edition. No Ottoman official commits such basic mistakes with dates, especially in the higher echelons, like governors. To ascribe premeditation to the Ottoman government, Andonian asserts that the Armenians never thought of insurrection. Andonian must never have heard of the Armenian revolutionary groups engaging in wholesale terror like the Union of Salvation, the Black Cross, Protectors of the Fatherland, Armenakan, the Hunchaks, the Dashnaks, Nemesis, and more between 1862 and 1922. Perhaps worst of all is the Armenian Military Academy established in Bulgaria in 1906. A military academy, imagine that. So much for being loyal citizens. Anyway, Andonian emphasizes that the thought of rebellion never passed through their heads. Numerous genuine Turkish documents and Armenian sources show just the contrary. Bogos Nubar Pasha, for example, the head of the Armenian delegation to the Paris conference, peace conference, states in a letter dated 18 November 1919 that the Armenian military detachments fought against the Ottomans as belligerents. How about that for a confession? The English and the French texts of the same documents have pronounced differences in wording, with several omissions and additions. For one, the dates differ. A paragraph that starts with Dr. Nazim Bey writes in the French version cannot be found in the English publication. Some sentences change places, for instance, going from the 6th paragraph to the 2nd. Omissions and additions are too many to be considered simple typographical errors. The documents use poor Turkish grammar and language. In some cases, the English or French version of a document is printed with no original. The originals or copies of these telegrams do not exist in the Prime Minister's archives in Istanbul. Signatures on the documents are also fake. For instance, Mustafa Abdülhalik Bey's genuine signature is different from his supposed signatures in the Andonian books. Further, the cipher books at the official archives disclose that no such telegrams were sent on such prescribed dates. In some cases, two fake telegrams bear the same number, which is impossible. In one of the French documents, the number of dead Armenians is quoted as 95,000. In its English translation, the number mysteriously goes up to 100,000. Some of the documents could not be signed by Mustafa Abdülhalik as the governor of Aleppo simply because he was not the governor then. He didn't take the post yet. The governor was Bekir Sami Bey, another person, the former starting duty on 27 September 1331. Not knowing this, Andonian apparently had Mustafa Abdülhalik signing many documents previous to his taking up duties in Aleppo. There are genuine documents, for instance, the one dated 22nd of September 1331 in Turkish archives, signed by Bekir Sami as the governor of Aleppo. Mustafa Abdülhalik could not have signed a fake document dated 3 September 1331 as the governor of the same city 19 days before he took up that position. There are also cases in which Andonian's documents match the archives copies only in dates, but not the number or the subject matter. For instance, the cipher telegram dated 3 September 1331 ought to have been numbered 78, not 502, which was about the need to dig artesian wells in several places on the Sinai Peninsula. It had nothing to do with Armenians. Some of the writings are on the kind of paper used in foreign schools or readily available from the local PTT offices. Such paper stocks were never used as official records. One of his common errors is that he never adds 13 to the days of the month to find the Miladi dates. Not knowing the Ottoman government's actual cipher, he frequently made up his own, which does not correspond to the cipher system available in the archives. The two telegrams that are frequently referred to and attributed to Talat Pasha are the ones number 819 and 1181 in Andonian's book. The former is dated 7 March 1332, which is 20 March 1916. No such telegram was sent from the Ministry of Interior to the governorship of Aleppo on that day. None. The only telegraph which bears this date is numbered 9, and its subject matter is the Armenians in Antep. Andonian has again erred, having forgotten that documents begin being numbered from 1, starting with March 1st. It is unreasonable to think that 819 telegrams might have been sent from Istanbul to Aleppo within a short span of 7 days. Moreover, on that very day, Ottoman records show a different kind of cipher was in use, much different than the one fabricated by Andonian. As to the second notorious telegram, it is suspicious that the number 1181 does not appear in the French and the English text. The Turkish and the English texts bear 16 September 1915 as the date, while the French version is dated 15 September 1915. Here, Talat Pasha refers to the destruction of all Armenians and allegedly uses a style of language revealing a confession, if you believe the Armenians. On that day, a telegram was indeed sent, but it was numbered 84, not 1181, and its subject was postponement of the transfers of the Armenians working on the railroads. Andonian's cipher system again fails to correspond with the method used then. Andonian was careless and slanderous with the numbers of his documents. The one we are dealing with now bears 1181, but his other document, dated 3 September 1331, is numbered 502, and still a third one, dated 29 September 1331, is identified as 537. How can document numbers go 502, 1181, and back to 537? How can a document sandwiched in between the numbers 502 and 537 be 1181? Go figure. The governor of Aleppo, who seems to figure out prominently in Andonian's book, was exiled to Malta by Britain on 7 June 1920. The British searched the Ottoman archives, used the Armenian church reports, resorted to witness accounts, and finally applied to the US government, requesting archival evidence, if any. Official replies on 1 June 1921 and 23rd of July 1921 expressed regret that they could not find proof to convict any detainees in Malta. These anomalies, errors, and omissions did not prevent the Daily Telegraph of London from publishing its in 1929 May of 1922 issue some of those fabricated Andonian documents. Had these documents not been concerned with the Turks and the Armenians, no historian, no writer, correspondent, politician, or commentator would have even touched them with a 10-foot pole. Most Armenian propagandists, having realized that these documents have now been universally recognized as forgeries, stay away from them. Only the most zealous followers of a long discredited political narrative still use them as references. Sadly, one finds the reproduction of these fake telegrams in Armenian websites even today. And a few occasional scholars, quote, continue to stubbornly and hopelessly claim that the documents are real in their dishonest and racist essays, typically with highfalutin titles like The Anatomy of a Genocide. Yeah, right. Misleading quotations, selective use of sources, arbitrary dates, poor Turkish grammar and punctuation, non-existent characters, fabricated documents. There's ample doubt, to say the least, as to the document's authenticity. Authors Orel and Yüce have reproduced several original documents which further demolish whatever remains of Andonian's bogus telegrams. Thinking that Armenians use these fake documents to acquit a notorious Armenian terrorist, Tehlirian, who killed Talat Pasha point blank in 1921, makes me sad and disappointed. But that's another discussion for another time. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.